be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 44th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Princess Sparkle and Headmaster Dumbledore both stared at the cube on his desk. "We can't destroy it," Albus said heavily and slowly. "As long as he has at least one Horcrux left, he will survive and come back." It was as if he measured and weighed each word before saying it. After a pause, Twilight said, just as heavily, "And we know that he has at least one left Hufflepuff's cup." She looked up at him. "Yes," he said after a moment. He returned her gaze steadily. "But we don't know where it is." "Not even a suspicion," she continued, slowly, thoughtfully. "True. Will the cube contain him? In his present state?" "Yes. He is cut off from the world. The runes won't allow any magic past them, in either direction. He will exist just as he was when we captured him." They resumed staring at the cube. They shifted in their respective chairs as they thought. "And, as I told Harry, we can't just hide it. Things like that always get found and released." Dumbledore had to agree with her. Horrid items like this did tend to resurface in time. "Hogwarts is supposed to be the safest place in England," she said, thoughtfully. "It is," Albus said with conviction. "Yet, he hid a Horcrux here for decades." He sighed and deflated slightly. "Yes, that is true," he said glumly. "He managed to sneak past all of our defenses." He shrunk back into his chair. "That, too, is true," he murmured, even more dejected. She looked up at him. "Gringotts is supposed to be the most secure place in England." He narrowed his eyes. "Yes, most consider it so. The break-in last summer has shaken that confidence, some, though." She shook her head. "But that is only recently. 10 years ago. Gringotts was considered impregnable." "That is true. So, if he hid one here, the tiara, would it not make sense to hide one there?" He nodded slowly. "There are tens of thousands of vaults. He would only trust something of this importance to one of his most loyal lieutenants. Most are in Azkaban. Doesn't Gringotts have a rule about storing dangerous objects in a vault?" He slowly smiled. "Why, yes, they do, I believe." He sat up straight. "If we brought to their attention the explosive abilities of these things, they would be very interested." He leaned across his desk and swept the cube up in his hand. Opening his Fideliused drawer, he dropped the cube in it. Twilight shuddered. "That is so weird." She rubbed her head with her right hand. "We are so fortunate he never thought to do anything like that." She shuddered. Then she frowned. Although, once he was bodily destroyed, the secret would be revealed, wouldn't it? She looked at him. "Perhaps." He said softly. "Can a ghost be a Fidelius secret keeper?" He looked back at her. "I suppose it depends upon how much of a soul the ghost has." A slow grin crept across her face. "An experiment." She started to wriggle in place. Dumbledore hid a smile of his own behind his hand. He cleared his throat. "I think I shall visit Gringotts after dinner, tonight." She sighed, and nodded. After a moment's contemplation, she said, "The guards will stay here until the students leave. Any changes, now, would cause talk. The rumors in the castle are bad enough as it is." Also, there might be other followers of his, nearby, that will notice when he fails to contact them. He nodded. Thank you. The less attention we bring to this problem, the better. After a few moments' contemplation, she looked up. Could you show me the spell you used to alter the mirror? She said hopefully. He stood. Now is as good a time as any, he said smiling. Not even half a minute later he apparated back into the room. He took the miniature mirror out of his pocket, placed it on the floor, and restored it. I hope you don't mind, she said as a parchment and feather floated off his desk. He smiled indulgently. I think I can manage. A moment, please, the princess said. She transformed into an alicorn and walked around the mirror. The quill scribbled and diagrammed almost non-stop on the parchment as it floated beside her. She carefully studied the magic that encompassed the mirror and how it focused on the area in front of it. Finally, she sat to one side. She looked over at him. Can you cast it now? Easily, he said. He took a galleon out of his pocket and pointed his wand at it. He cast a spell. The coin began to glow brightly. Then he started another spell. Twilight watched closely, switching back and forth between the mirror and the galleon. The ink feather was almost a blur. This one was more complex. Partway through, the galleon began to float. At the end, it disappeared. There, he said. The galleon will remain in the mirror until someone wants it, but not to use it to light up the dark. He returned to his desk chair. She nodded, still focused on the mirror. She began to frown. Is this the exact same spell? She looked over her shoulder at him. He stroked his beard. Yes, it is. He watched her curiously. It is actually quite simple. Only one who wants to find the item find it, but not use it will be able to get it, otherwise they just see themselves using it. She turned and stared at him. It is a bit more complex than that, though, or Quirrell would have had the stone. He didn't want to use it, according to Harry, only to give it to his MSTR. Well, yes. I suppose I should say the spell is such that only one who didn't want the stone to be used, either by themselves or another, could get it. How did you intend to retrieve the stone? She said, eyebrows raised. He stroked his beard, simple. I don't want to use the stone, merely give it back to the owner, Nicholas Flamel. She tilted her head. Who you know is going to use it. Thus, the mirror won't give it to you. He sat there a moment. Ah, yes, that is a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? He thought a moment. I suppose I would ask a Muggleborn for help to finish one of my experiments. To retrieve a fake gem from the mirror, so that I might return it to a friend. She nodded. That would work. It would have worked for Tom, too. It's what he tried to do with Harry, except Harry knew about the stone's properties. She sighed. Harry probably didn't get it because deep inside he knows that if he had it, he could use it to save someone's life, so he would use it. Albus had to agree with her. But that's not the only problem with this spell. Oh. He tilted his head inquiringly. Well, your spell is actually fine. It starts with, does the one reflected want to find and use the item? If the intent is, to use the item, then the mirror locks to seeing the item in use in the mirror and the rest of the spell is ignored. If the first part isn't triggered, then it falls through to the second part. The spell checks to see if the one reflected wants to find and give the item to someone else, who they know intends to use it. If the final intent is, to use the item, then the mirror locks to seeing the item in the mirror, and, again, the rest of the spell is ignored. She glanced down at her. Notes. If the first two parts aren't triggered, then the spell checks to see if the one reflected wants to find but does not intend to use the item. If the intent is, not to use the item, then it gives them the item. But if it does give up the item, then the next time someone steps in front of the mirror the spell runs its course, displaying the item as necessary, even though the item isn't there anymore. She looked back up. But you plan to remove the spell afterwards, so that's not a problem, not really. If someone were to walk in front of the mirror, and doesn't think of the item, nothing is supposed to happen. They never even see it. She looked at her notes, and sighed. Except something does happen. She turned and looked at the mirror. He straightened up. Any unintended consequence could be a disaster in a spell. The problem comes up in the interaction between your spell and the mirrors. She looked into her notes, flipping rapidly back and forth. Here, she looked back up, briefly. Your spell is interfering with the main function of the mirror, to display one's deepest longing. In the case of someone searching for the item you put in the mirror, your spell forces the mirror to use their surface desires of what they want, to find and use the item. Your spell subverts the mirror's only function from displaying their deepest longing. That creates a conflict of functions. As a result, the magic in the mirror will try to resolve this conflict so that it can function properly, once again. She circled the mirror. This is about 100 years old, right? Albus nodded. It has to be very powerful to slip into our minds and ferret out our desires. Its magic is very complex to be able to differentiate between immediate wants, mere dreams, and deep desires. Not only that, it doesn't alert or damage anyone in the process of getting that information. She stopped, staring at it. It truly is a wonderful, delicate, and stuck piece of work. With potentially nasty outcomes. She looked at him, clearly expecting a response. He nodded again. Harry and the Phillies told me what they saw in it. They did not see mere reflections. She looked back at the mirror. They saw people moving, talking, and interacting like they were real, not static or stiff images. To be able to do that, it almost certainly has to have some form of sentience granted to it by magic, to fulfill its function. That would explain why the reflections in the mirror can cry, laugh, and react to each other in such a lifelike manner. She circled the mirror, again. Otherwise, the images would just stand there, static and unmoving. Which would hamper a major part of the mirror's function, to pull people into staring into its depths. She glanced back at him. But your spell forces it to show only the main reflection, and maybe the image of the one they wish to give the item to. It suppresses the deepest longing image, unless finding the item is truly their deepest longing. For example, they want to use the item, but their deepest longing is to rule the world. She looked up at him. Do you understand? If I don't know about the item and stand in front of the mirror, I see only myself. My deepest desires are not shown. But if I know what the mirror of Erised is, I'll be puzzled at what I don't see. I will want to find out what is wrong with the mirror. I want to find what is causing the problem. Which is the item in your spell. So, if I want to find the problem, your spell takes that as my surface longing, which means I want to find the item, because your spell contains the item. She again studied the mirror, poking it with a hoof. The mirror knows I want to use the mirror for its original purpose, and your spell with the item is in the way. But if the item is removed, then the mirror can work properly. She turned to look at him, again. You see. I want to find what is causing the problem, which is the item hidden by your spell, but I don't want to use the hidden item because I don't even know it is there. She paused and glanced back at the mirror. She set the parchment down. The rune spells on the mirror will see that I want to find whatever it is that is causing the problem, the item. I don't know exactly what the item is, but I want to find the problem. And your spell will know that I don't want to use the item. Find and don't use. Both conditions are met. The definition of want to find has to be stretched, but the enchantments on this mirror are rather flexible. They have to be, to interpret and display your desires. She sighed softly. The mirror will give me the item because both conditions of the third choice in your spell are satisfied. That adjusting the definition of what is wanted, by overriding the need for the reflected person to know precisely about the item, would correct the conflict in functions you have created is merely a detail. Albus leaned back in his chair, chagrined. Oh, dear. He looked at the mirror. I do believe you might be right. He paused, musing. The reflection would probably be laughing at me, too, delighted at upsetting my plans and at the opportunity to trap whomever was standing there. Much like the Sorting Hat sometimes laughs at me when it places a student in an unexpected house. He looked back at her. Then it is very good that only someone who knows what is in the mirror, and determined enough to make it through 6 puzzle rooms to reach it, would ever see it. The princess nodded, pressing her lips into a thin line. Yes, indeed, she said. Ellie looked up from her breakfast plate, startled, as one of the Hufflepuff prefects, Tim, and one of the guards headed for her seat at the table. She tried to avoid Tim. He had a rather unhealthy tendency to set things on fire as a way of showing off. Being at the end of the tables nearest the head table, she had noticed the headmaster's late arrival, but hadn't thought much about it. It clearly was related to yesterday's events and he had been working on that. Based on his pleased and happy emotions, it had had a satisfactory ending. Her alert yesterday had had the effect of kicking over an anthill, as guards and others had sprung into action. The Thursday afternoon exams had even been postponed and the students restricted to their houses. She knew Harry Potter had been kidnapped, searched for, and finally found. He had been injured, but was safe and now in the hospital wing. The Gryffindor table was missing him and his herdmates, as well as Bon Bon and Lyra. The princess had probably already returned to Equestria. Details had been vague, but it had had something to do with the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side of the castle. The one guarded by the Cerberus. Supposedly, it led to other traps. With a final goal of something quite valuable. Something linked with last summer's Gringotts robbery. That didn't matter, though. What did was that the professors and guards were all feeling much more relaxed than they had been at any time since the guards' arrival. Something, at the very least, had been resolved. Tim leaned close and said, ominously, "Come with me, please." He stared at her intently. The headmaster said Princess Sparkle would like to thank you. He swept his arm to indicate she should get up and follow him. The remains of her breakfast burst into smoke and flames with a small pop. His feeling of amusement were a contradiction to his theatrics. "Princess Sparkle," she gasped. She hurriedly grabbed her bag and stood. He turned and led the way, his robes almost billowing like a certain potion MSTRs did. A few moments later, the three arrived in the small chamber off the hall the first years had waited in back in September. Tim opened the door with an extravagant flourish. "Enter," he intoned gravely, then chuckled in low portentous tone. Tim was more than a bit of a drama queen. She nervously noticed that this time the chamber wasn't empty. Waiting for her was not only Princess Sparkle, but Harry and his herdmates. She noted that Harry had his arm in a sling, so his full napping couldn't have been that terrible. She barely noticed the guard standing to one side. She did notice that Tim closed the door behind her with an unnecessarily loud bang. The prefect remained in the main hall. Her fear that she had been discovered, unfounded as it might have been, receded as she tasted the emotions in the room. Gratitude and thankfulness filled the room. Their smiles were all genuine. The princess waved her closer. Unsure of what to do, she complied, then curtsied with her head bowed. "There is no need to do that, Mr. Rippy," the princess said warmly. She straightened and just looked at the princess. "I want to say thank you, from the bottom of my heart." She suddenly stepped forward and swept the startled girl into a hug. Feelings of love, gratitude, relief, and happiness flooded through her senses. If she had been feeling peckish before, she was now approaching full. "If not for your astute observations yesterday, and immediate reaction, I wouldn't have my son today. For that I cannot thank you enough," she said, not letting go of Ellie. "My son's kidnapping was unrelated to any events in Equestria, and was, in no way, a reflection of his position there. I cannot tell you any further details on what drove the kidnapping, as those details are not mine to share at this point in time. Revealing them would provide warning to our enemies here in this world." She stood back, her hands on Ellie's shoulders. "Just know that the persons responsible for it intended to kill him." She swallowed, and her voice thickened with emotion. If you had delayed even a few minutes, he might not be here with us today. And you were the only one to notice anything amiss out of everyone who went through that room. A cloud of depression flitted across the room at that proclamation. She looked into Ellie's eyes. Ellie could feel her sincerity. I am an Alicorn, a princess of Equestria, and Harry Potter is my son. As such, this was a direct affront to Equestria, myself, and a prince of Equestria. The person responsible has been captured and will be punished appropriately. There was a feeling of grim satisfaction as she said that. She smiled briefly. And the person responsible for saving him shall be rewarded, she said. The feeling segued into happiness. For various reasons, including state security, I cannot publicly acknowledge the true depth of how much we owe you, but know that if there is anything Equestria can do for you, we will do it, to the best of our ability. She again pulled the Ling into a hug. Know that you forever have a friend in Twilight Sparkle. Ellie easily picked up the feeling of deep sincerity from the princess. Moments later, Ellie realized she was the center of a massive hug involving the entire family. She almost passed out from the intensity of the love and friendship poured in her direction. Slightly drunk, and wishing she could offload what she had so she could get more, she staggered a bit as they let go of her. I didn't know anything was wrong, it just didn't feel right, she said, dazed. And that's why you have our friendship, declared the princess, with another flood of emotions that Ellie, regretfully, had to turn aside. You had nothing at stake, you had nothing to gain, you didn't have to say or do anything. You could have just said to yourself, that's odd, and never mentioned it. But you did. Princess Sparkle stepped back. I've been told you are an orphan. Do you need assistance of any kind? Ellie blinked. No, she said softly. I am well funded from my family's vault. I'll be spending my hauls at the family estate in Scotland. Princess Sparkle nodded. Good. If you need anything, just send a note to the embassy to my attention. She smiled. If you wish to visit Equestria, likewise, drop me a note. You can stay at the palace, either in Ponyville or Canterlot. And I'll cover all your expenses. She stared at the woman, wide-eyed. Going to Equestria would be a total disaster. This was a disaster. She had wanted to stay as far from the pony's attention as she could manage. And here she was, getting personal, privileged attention from a princess. Plus, glancing at the smiling and glowing with happiness herd, she knew they would expect her, their new friend, to spend time with them. Mistaking her silent dismay for something else, Princess Sparkle said, I think we've overwhelmed the poor girl. She looked around at the herd. And isn't there an exam you all need to go to? There was a loud gasp and hurried checking of rucksacks. They had their history of magic exam today. They rushed out of the room, with their guard SCRT. Despite her longing not to attract attention, her arrival in the exam room in the middle of Harry's herd put her front and center of the gossip mill. She sighed as she set down her rucksack and Professor Lupin told them to open their scrolls and begin. No doubt, by the time dinner rolled around, the gossips would have her married and with foal as the latest in the Potter herd. The Gryffindor-Ravenclaw match took place the next day, Saturday. Potter's arm had been completely healed by that morning. MDM Pomfrey had declared him fit to play, as long as you don't pull any foolhardy stunts. Ganger had told the other firsties, shaking her head at the silliness of the healer and expecting Potter to listen to such advice. It was a hard-fought game. However, without an interfering cursing from a certain now-dead professor, or biased refereeing by a surly professor with an axe to grind, Potter captured the snitch after barely an hour of play. The Pegasus guards watched the game quite intently, with many feverishly taking notes. Dumbledore stood and tapped his water goblet gently, the sharp ringing tone bringing the great hall to an inquisitive silence. They were at the official end-of-year feast, the Monday after the exams. Ellie noticed that while Bon Bon and Lyra sat bracketing the first-year animagi, the princess was at the head table with the headmaster. So, Dumbledore said, we have once more reached the conclusion of a successful year of cramming knowledge into your empty heads. No doubt, everything you have learned will quickly drain during your brilliant summer halls, leaving your heads empty, once more, for us to refill to bursting next year. The students smiled or chuckled at his gentle jibe. To our graduating 7th years, we offer our sincere congratulations and wish you all long, profitable, and successful careers. I have no doubt you will bring honor to Hogwarts with your accomplishments. He smiled genially as he looked over the seats where the 7th years were congregated. He looked out at the red and gold decorations throughout the great hall. A distinct color change from the previous 6 years of silver and green at the end of year feast. The decorations celebrating the house that won the House Cup would remain until the Hogwarts Express left with the students after the exam results were released. I congratulate Gryffindor House on winning the Quidditch Cup this year. Saturday's Quidditch match, between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor was especially close, until the snitch made its appearance. He looked at Harry, who blushed. Scootaloo, on his left, and Apple Bloom, on his right, bumped shoulders with him, grinning. The cheering from the Gryffindor table was thunderous, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were only a bit less so. Oliver was so happy, he had tears down his cheeks. The Slytherins were noticeably silent. Their Quidditch team members were scowling darkly. Professor McGonagall looked especially happy, her giant grin decidedly out of place on her normally stern face. She stroked the Quidditch trophy on the table in front of her plate lovingly. Flitwick and Sprout watched and smiled approvingly. Professor Snape looked like he had bitten into something extremely sour. The House Cup here needs awarding, and the points stand thusly: in 4th place, Hufflepuff, with 352, in 3rd, Ravenclaw has 426, Slytherin, 472, and Gryffindor, with 480 points. Again, a storm of cheering and stamping broke out from the Gryffindor table. Yes, yes, well done, Gryffindor, said Dumbledore warmly, smiling, his eyes twinkling. However, certain adjustments must be made. Confused mumbling broke out, and Gryffindor table went unnaturally silent. First, to Ellie de Rippy, for acute perception and timely action to prevent a tragedy, I award 20 points. Ellie was completely surprised and stared around at her fellow Hufflepuffs, who congratulated her. It was the first time in her life she had ever been awarded points. Or even acknowledged as anything but average. She was simultaneously gratified at the recognition, and terrified at being singled out in front of the entire school. Second, to Mr. Harry Potter, said Dumbledore, for pure nerve and keeping his head in disastrous circumstances, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Gryffindor table applauded and cheered, but they were a bit uncertain what all this meant. Dumbledore smiled and gazed around the hall. I realize these awards did not materially change the standing of the individual houses, but I felt it was necessary to acknowledge the accomplishments of these two unusual individuals for staying true to the high standards of their houses. Therefore, it is with great delight that I award the Hogwarts House Cup of 1991 to Gryffindor House. With a wave of his wand, a giant house cup appeared on a stand behind Professor McGonagall. It was a change from the previous 6 years when Slytherin had won the cup. The Gryffindor table exploded into relieved cheering, stamping, and table pounding. Even the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw celebrated the downfall of Slytherin. Slytherin House, Ellie thought, no doubt were even now scheming to win back both trophies, and put the other houses back in their proper places behind the purebloods. The noise went on for a few moments before the headmaster was once again tapping his water goblet. The room's noise slowly dropped to an acceptable level, he said, there is one more announcement to make, this one is to our graduating class. He turned slightly, Princess Sparkle. She stood and looked across the hall before focusing on the 7th years. I'm sure most of you have plans on what you want to do next in your lives. However, I have something I would like you to consider. She glanced down a moment, as if at notes. The entire school focused on what she had to say. The manner in which witches and wizards use magic is unusual to equestrians, and many of the things you do with it are intriguing. For that reason, I would like you all to consider working in Equestria as a part of your future. We have a deep need for teachers in all types of magic transfigurations, charms, potions, runes, arithmancy, practically everything except history and astronomy. If you are more interested in doing instead of teaching, we have openings in all those fields I just mentioned, both here, on this side of the portal, and in Equestria. For more information, please speak with Bon Bon or Lyra. The two transformed ponies stood and shyly waved their hands at the students. She swept her gaze across the rest of the hall. In fact, if any of you know of someone looking for new employment, tell them to drop by the Equestrian Embassy office in either Diagon Alley or Hogsmeade. We would be happy to see them. Applicants should at least have an OWL in whatever field in which they want employment. Newts will only be required for teaching positions. She stopped and scanned her audience. Also, if you, or your family, know of any squibs who might be interested in being Pegasi, we are in desperate need to fill positions in weather manufacturing, manipulation, and management. She paused and smirked. And we have discovered that squibs, as Pegasi, can use wands, if that makes a difference. The squibs aren't as powerful as unicorns and other native equestrians, but they can use the wands for minor spells. We will provide any needed wands and basic instruction. The Equestrian Embassy in Little Whinging can take applications, as well, if that would be more convenient for any interested applicants. The students, and professors, stared at her, stunned into complete silence. Squibs using wands in Equestria was groundbreaking news for wizards and witches, Harry realized. And it must be something fairly recent, because his mum had never mentioned it to him. She started to sit, but then straightened as she remembered something. Oh, and for 5th and 6th years? If your parents give their approval, we would be interested in hiring for summer employment. Again, that would be on both sides of the portal. The hall burst into excited chatter. She sat back down, as did Bon Bon and Lyra. Harry sighed. Apparently, it was tradition at Hogwarts that the students waited for their exams to be graded before they went home, instead of the school simply owl-mailing the results. So, they had to hang around for a few days. Which made the whole end-of-year feast rather a bit of a letdown. He had thought they would be returning home the next day on the Hogwarts Express. Instead, it would be next Saturday, the 20th. "I'm sorry, Harry," his mum said after the end-of-year feast, when they were at the Burrow. "But you really should finish out the year with your friends at the school. I know you'd rather just return home, I'd rather you did that, too." They were in the Weasley sitting room, his mum pacing in front of the fireplace, with him and the 5 witches sitting on the couch or its arms watching her. "But the other students will notice if you aren't there. There will be rumors, once more, that you are getting special treatment because of who you are. It will draw attention to you even more than the kidnapping did. And not in a good way." She sighed at his disappointed expression. "There are many reasons why I'm asking this of you. The major reason we are having you attend Hogwarts is for you to experience some of what your heritage is all about. Both your mother and father attended school here, learning this fascinating approach to magic. I think that this is a good opportunity to give you an idea of what they learned and how that made them what they were. This way, when Sirius or Remus tell you a story about your parents, you'll know what they are talking about, and have a better understanding of them." He sighed and nodded. He did want to know more about his parents. Not that he didn't love his mum, of course. But she was his mum now, they were his parents, then. From the histories he had read, and the stories he had been told, his parents had loved him just as much, if not more, than his mum. They had, after all, sacrificed their very lives to protect him. He resolved to learn as much about his parents as possible. It was only right to do so. He owed them that, if nothing else. He couldn't let their memory die. She pulled him from the couch and hugged him. "Harry, there is a reason Riddle attacked your parents' home 10 years ago." She pushed him back, holding him at arm's length, her hands on his shoulders. She looked him steadily in his eyes. "Apparently, there is a true prophecy about you, one that was issued well before you were born. It says that you will be the pony to destroy, or, rather, vanquish, the Dark Lord. Which everyone thinks you did 10 years ago. The fillies sat there in shock at the revelation. Then they lunged to their feet and surrounded Harry and his mum in a group hug. A prophecy that he had been the target that night 10 years ago, just as he had been the target last week. The Dark Lord had gone to their home that night to kill him, not them. Just as he had chosen Harry out of all the students at Hogwarts last week. He had gone out of his way to kidnap Harry, when other students would have been easier to capture, and less likely to be noticed as missing. And the original reason was a prophecy made before he was born. 10 years ago, he suddenly realized, his parents had willingly sacrificed themselves to save him. The Dark Lord's attack on Harry had not been merely an accident of time and place. Ever since arriving back here, after getting his Hogwarts letter, he had had a feeling that that attack wasn't as random as everyone had thought. His parents had known the Dark Lord wanted Harry. That the Dark Lord wanted Harry specifically. They could have stood to the side and then been safe. It was simply incredulous to think that what had happened in his nursery was the result of anything he might have done. He had read the stories about that night. While most followed the same narrative of when and where things had happened, they dramatically differed on the details. Some had his father in a long, dramatic, and desperate fight, with declarations, speeches, and demands. Others said he had dodged a few spells and then had been killed. No one knew what had happened in his nursery that night, but the stories were as varied as they were many. They had only one detail that they all agreed on: his parents had died from the killing curse. Knowing the Dark Lord was after him, his mother and father, most likely his mother, had done something to protect him. Something so powerful, it had done what had never happened before: reflected the killing curse back at its originator, even after his parents were dead. Harry had, somehow, survived the same curse that killed everyone else. Because of what they had done. He knew it was true. How he knew, he couldn't say. It was just a feeling that he had. Deep, deep inside was the feeling that, impossible as it seemed, the Dark Lord had died after casting that curse at him. Unfortunately, after last week, we know he is trying to come back. His mum sighed sadly. It doesn't matter if the prophecy is true or not, Tom believes it is true and is acting accordingly. Which is why he did what he did 10 years ago, in singling you out. And the reason was the same for last week. Unluckily, Harry knew, he was famous in the wizarding world for both surviving the killing curse and vanquishing the Dark Lord. Something his parents had done, not him. They were the ponies who had destroyed the Dark Lord, the first time. As a baby, Harry had neither the magic nor skill to destroy such a powerful wizard. But the backwards, stupid, simple-minded, dunderhead wizards had decided he, Harry, a baby, had beaten the Dark Lord. Imbeciles. Not that his mum used those words to describe witches and wizards, but they were appropriate. He couldn't help snorting in derision at the very thought that he had beaten the Dark Lord. Just like he hadn't beaten the Dark Lord this time either. It had been his mum to the rescue and the headmaster. He had been only moments from death. And now, his mum said, everything you do in public is scrutinized closely. But the belief that he had beaten the Dark Lord meant he was a symbol to the witches and wizards. He was as famous here as Princess Celestia or Luna were at home. Every pony watched and reported everything he did, just as the ponies did Luna at home. He was both praised and criticized for almost everything he did. Just like the princesses. He could do no wrong, he could do no good. He could only hope the attention would shift to some pony else quickly. Usually, it did, for the princesses. But it always came right back to them, again and again, and it would for him, too. She pushed him back, again, to arm's length. She studied his reactions carefully. Never worry that I am anything but proud of what you have done, or will do, in this school. What you're learning here is a valuable experience that the princesses hope you can share with others when you finish it. He nodded, dazed, in reply. Right now, the princesses are setting up an entire schooling system, for adults, to bring this knowledge and expertise to our ponies. But what you are learning here is how future generations of ponies will learn while they are colts and fillies. The insights you, and the fillies, she had looked over at the three witches sitting nearby, can give us will be invaluable in designing what is appropriate for us. She had looked back at him, and dropped her arms to her sides. You four know what it is like in Equestria. She looked at Harry and the fillies as they slowly sat back on the couch. Sweetie Belle, Apple Bloom, and Scootaloo, you three know what it is like to be a pony. The wizard and witch tutors we're bringing through do not have that understanding. They still feel and think like humans, not ponies. That colors how they approach everything. Ponies have an innate understanding of magic that the humans just can't comprehend, simply because they aren't using magic, like we do, from the moment they learn to walk. She had smiled at them. When the princesses asked you, Harry, to go to this school last year, they had no idea what they were asking. No pony understood just how different magic was in this world. She took a deep breath. Nor did any pony understand just how difficult a place this world is for magic users. There are 1,000 times more people here than there are ponies in Equestria. But there are 100 times more ponies than there are witches and wizards in England. So, the problems are incredibly complex. The princesses want to do everything they can to simplify those problems. We have an excellent relationship with the non-magical humans. Unfortunately, their history and fear of magic is going to make it difficult to maintain that relationship. But we will still try. There is too much to share between us, that will benefit us both, to just give up. We want an excellent relationship with the witch kind. There is so much they can teach us about using magic in ways we never suspected. But with their secretive attitude, and disdain of anything that hasn't been in their society for generations, it is going to be a difficult undertaking. Which is why we're asking you to join the rest of your friends at Hogwarts during the day instead of just going home right now. Like it or not. Your name, Harry Potter, is a symbol to these witches and wizards. We have to take that into account with everything you do. As a result, you staying, or not staying, at Hogwarts will have an impact on what the princesses want to do with which kind in this world. While the princesses would like it if you stayed here, if you decide to not return here in September, in view of what has happened this year, they have told me they will honor your decision and not mention it again. She pulled him up again and hugged him, joined by the fillies. Don't worry about the prophecy. That's for us adults to take care of. We will deal with him, just as we did last week. If you need to be involved, we will tell you and coach you. And, above all, protect you. You're my son, I couldn't do less. Besides, do you really want to just abandon your friends? He shook his head. No, he said softly. Plus, this gives you the opportunity to decide who you would like to come visit us in Ponyville this summer. In addition to the Weasleys and Grangers, of course. He just stood there for a few minutes, basking in the glow that ponies cared about him in a way no one here had ever done except his parents. He and the Weasleys continued to flow to the school, through Dumbledore's office, every morning and then returned to the Barrow every evening after dinner. The days weren't boring, however. They had optional classes they could attend, there were presentations and simple classes on the electives they could take in their third year, club presentations on why that club would be worth joining next year, or they could spend their time playing or studying with their friends. The guards had noticed the trebuchet by the lake when they had first arrived and quickly built one of their own. Throughout the day came the steady thunk. Splash. As the students and guards relaxed and used them. Seeing the Pegasi guards play dodge pony with the devices had inspired a new sport of dodge broom. MDM Pomfrey had not been pleased at the new influx of broken bones that had precipitated. The Quidditch students didn't care. At the moment, Harry was sitting in the stands, watching a pick-up game of Quidditch between Ravenclaw and some off-duty Pegasi guards. Despite their unfamiliarity with the game, the Pegasi were making the Ravenclaws work for every goal. Ravenclaw was ahead by 1 goal. After this game, the Hufflepuffs had scheduled their own game against a different team of Pegasi. It was all rather fun to watch, but he would have sooner gone home. But Neville had told him that there was a protocol to inviting some pony to visit you at your home. If they were close family friends, like the Weasleys and Grangers, a simple, "Come on over," was adequate. But if you didn't know the parents, a more formal approach was required. He pulled a scroll and quill from his rucksack. He stared at the guard seeker circling high overhead. Now who would he like to see come visit this summer? Having to take the Hogwarts Express back to London, and then the FLU to the embassy, instead of doing something faster and more direct, was disappointing. On the other hoof, it did give everyone a chance to say goodbye to their friends until next September. Making matters worse, as far as he was concerned, was that both Bon Bon and Lyra insisted on traveling on the train, too. As if he had to have full sitters at his age. The carriages to the Hogsmeade train station were escorted by the EUP, of course, to the watching villagers' surprise. They had known something had happened at the school 2 weeks ago, but details had been sorely lacking. Seeing scores of barely waist-high ponies, wearing strange golden armor and other equipment mounted on saddles, both flying and pacing the carriages left them speechless. That half of the ponies walking were unicorns merely added to the villagers' confusion. Unicorns didn't wear armor, they didn't march in formation, and they certainly didn't start a conversation with you when you rhetorically asked what was going on. Oh, they knew about the equestrians having pony animagi forms, and they had seen several of the students in those forms before. Not to mention that there had been that strange situation earlier in the year with the explosions coming from the forest behind the castle and a couple of ponies in the village. But there was a difference between seeing 2 or 3 students changing into animagi, and then seeing scores of stern-faced armor-wearing examples right in front of you. That they were in pony forms, now, instead of appearing as wizards and witches, was especially confusing. Harry noticed, while waiting for his and his herdmates' turn in the carriages, that the ponies were clearly packing up their equipment and leaving. The mess and other tents had been packed away, the weaponry emplacements were in process of being dismantled, and the various dugouts, trenches, and foxholes were being filled back in. Earth ponies were busy restoring the lawn to its original condition. By tomorrow, he knew, no pony would ever know they had been there. It was quite an accomplishment, truthfully. To his surprise, and he really shouldn't have been, he saw that guards were sitting on top of the train. There were at least 3 on top of each car. The trip was nowhere as bad as he had expected. There was almost a constant stream of people dropping by to say goodbye for the summer. It also let Harry, and the fillies, pass out invitations to their friends to visit Equestria. With plenty of time to peruse the wonderful photo album that Hagrid had put together as a leaving gift. Harry learned from Neville that the school year was time to end so that the students would always be home before the summer solstice, the 21st, apparently, many of the more traditional wizarding families celebrated it. It also meant Harry and the fillies would be home in time for the summer sun celebration in Equestria. Arriving in London to find his mum, Rarity, Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Sirius was a pleasant surprise. He and the fillies looked forward to spending the night at their homes. Not to mention the giant party in Ponyville Pinkie Pie was sure to throw, tomorrow. Ellie stared at the rock. She was in her luxuriously furnished, sitting room, as they called it, in her newly refurbished mansion. It wasn't in Scotland, as she had told everyone. The goblins had talked her into this one, it was only about 200 miles, as the goblins had said, from London. It was far closer to the humans than she had wanted, but the price had been better than anything else. It was equipped with a FLU connection, but that was currently closed. The FLU had actually taken a lot of thought. She hadn't wanted to select a name that might give any equestrian a pause on hearing it. Similarly, she had wanted to acknowledge her heritage. In the end, after hours of indecision, she had decided Locum Tenens de Rippies, holding place of the Rippies, would do the job. It wasn't a simple name anyone could guess, which made it safer. It held nothing that might attract an equestrian investigation. No one would ever make the connection hidden within it, which she found very satisfying. In any event, powerful protective and mild repelling charms were up, and powered, on the mansion, itself, to keep the curious away. Both magical and not. The war charms that the goblins had established had cost almost as much as the entire rest of the property. They were currently dormant and awaiting activation, should they ever be needed. It would take her most of the summer to dig her escape tunnel and the preliminary storage chambers under the mansion. She had decided not to have the goblins do any of the excavation. The fewer that knew of her hive's existence, the better. Plus, she knew she would have a hive. The mirror of Erised seemed quite certain of that, based on what she had seen in it. It might not be a traditional hive, but it would be hers. Her new home was a combination of a non-magical estate of many hundreds of acres, the Riddles, and a magical family fallen on rough times, the Gaunts, another few acres, totaling 607 acres. The Gaunt homestead had been abandoned for too long and the goblins had razed it. The caretaker's cottage was one of several clustered near the new entrance to the combined estate. There would be room for more, if needed. The presence of a village not far away was both a bonus and detraction. It made a convenient source of food and extra labor beyond her estate, but it also brought the estate closer to the eyes of outsiders. But the convenience of the nearby village was just a bit too enticing. The only other problem was the graveyard on the site. She didn't want to neglect it and have someone wonder why she was ignoring traditions. They might come to investigate. She would hire locals to clean up the location so that it no longer looked so desolate and abandoned. That she was considerate of local feeling would probably win her latitude in her dealings with them. And lull suspicion that she was an evil equestrian monster. Any goodwill she could establish in the area would be to her distinct advantage. Good neighbors would do a lot to deflect any questions outsiders might pose. Or could it, perhaps, be moved to a better location, one not on her property? If it wasn't on her property, she didn't have to make allowances for unexpected visitors seeing things they shouldn't. It was the Monday after returning to London Saturday on the Hogwarts Express. She was pointedly ignoring the letter in her rucksack. It was an invitation from Harry Potter to visit Ponyville this summer. The mere thought of it made her shudder. The mansion was nice, she supposed, once more glancing around the room. The goblins had expended no small amount of galleons refurbishing and furnishing it. 10 bedrooms did seem a bit too much to her, having only ever seen the average pony houses in Canterlot, briefly, and Ponyville. But the goblins seemed to think this was appropriate for someone with her resources, so she didn't think any more about it. Unfortunately, as the only ling, pony, or person in the building, it had felt rather empty. Especially after living in the dorms with constant company for the last 10 months. Which was why she had spent the nights in the small storage closet beside the empty wine room's door in the cellar. It was much cozier when she added in pillows and blankets she had gotten spoiled at Hogwarts sleeping in a bed. Despite that, it was much more reminiscent of her hive back in Equestria than the huge bedrooms above. She would have started making resin walls down there, but she had plans for a proper hive and didn't want to waste the effort. Any room that a non-ling might see was to be left entirely alone, in that respect. She didn't want to leave any evidence that things weren't exactly as they appeared. The one wall she planned to use as an access would be carefully removed and replaced when she figured out the trick used at platform 9 3/4. It looked and acted like a wall until the right person approached it with a ticket. She wanted to tune it to accept only lings. It was a long-term project, given her current understanding of magic. In the meantime, a rotating wall would suffice. She had no worries about food. The Gryffindor party to celebrate winning both the Quidditch and Hogwarts House Cups for the first time in 7 years had been a bonus she hadn't anticipated. 3 more full jars, one had started out half full and part of another had been added to her collection. Once more she had 11 plus good-sized jars. More than enough to last her until December, much less September. She could even stretch it out further if she made a few trips to MDM Putafoot's tea shop. That was assuming she couldn't entice any newly married tenants to the caretaker's cottage. The current caretaker was a sour old man, barely managing to keep things from falling apart. That the villagers all viewed him with suspicion was not helpful in the slightest. Suspicions of him would become suspicions of her. Queen Mother would have disposed of him. But here, that would attract unwanted attention. It would be worth the money to send him to retirement far away. Give him a lump sum of money, a ticket to anywhere he wanted to go, and he would no longer be her problem. Perhaps buy a small cottage, there, with free rent to make sure he stayed put. First, this morning, she had carefully licked off the love clinging to the resin-coated stone that had made for a nice breakfast and filled her nicely. She wouldn't need to eat again all day, maybe 2. It had then taken her only a few minutes of careful tapping with a hammer and chisel to remove the resin. The rock was now revealed in all its dubious glory. She swept the resin aside. She would recycle it into her tunnels. Waste not, want not. The stone was a translucent red in color, longer than it was wide, roughly shaped, with odd angles and curves. It was only a bit larger than her fist. No one would ever mistake it for a gem. It just didn't have the required clarity and shine. Nor facets. Although, when the light hit it just right, it almost seemed to glow deep inside. It didn't look very impressive. It looked like an oddly shaped piece of something broken off from a glass sculpture. If she had seen it in Equestria, she wouldn't have looked twice. If it had been in her way, she would have kicked it out of sight without a thought. From what she had heard from the gossips at Hogwarts, though, this was the so-called philosopher's stone. An item of incalculable value. The thing that an evil wizard had kidnapped Harry Potter to get. Not that she could figure out what the pony had to do with this rock. You can make gold from lead with the philosopher's stone, they said. And make a potion that will grant you longer life each time you drink it. She snorted. Not that she knew how to make it do either of those two things. It did have an interesting smell, however. An enticing odor. The feel of it was softer than a ling would expect of a rock. Both were things she had not noticed previously. The longer she looked at it, the more she realized that it was attractive, in its own way. She noticed a small speck of green resin on one side. She gave it a quick lick. Her saliva should make it an easy matter to remove the offending material. It was hers, after all. To her surprise, the stone had a taste. She frowned, and tried again. What was that taste? It almost reminded her of how love tasted, but it wasn't as sweet. She would have thought that some of the love in the jar had soaked through the resin, which was supposed to be impossible if she had done it right, except it had a slightly sour taste, too. It seemed to change, as she continued to lick it. It actually tasted good. She seized a corner of it in her teeth and tentatively bit down on it. To her surprise, a tiny sliver broke off. She held it in her mouth, working it from side to side, the taste of it constantly changing. Her mouth filled with saliva and she swallowed and couldn't find the piece with her tongue anymore. It was gone. She stared intently at the stone, and then grabbed the end in her teeth and bit down hard. There was a crack, and a tiny fingernail-shaped chip broke off. This one tasted different, spicier, like victory. She sat the stone back on the table and stared. Slowly, she picked it up and dropped it back in its jar, still partially filled with love. Sealing the jar closed, again, she carried it into the cellar. She carefully excavated a pocket in the wall and sealed the jar in it. She took her time and carefully blended the new surface until it looked just like every other brick. To anyone who came in and looked, it was just another brick in the wall. Completely unnoticeable unless you were a ling and searching for it. She wandered back upstairs. Why had she taken a bite of that? Why did it feel so soft? Why did it taste so good? Why did it make her feel odd? She decided she would leave it alone for a while. Next on her schedule today was to inspect the greenhouses and tiny village by the gate. And then wander the perimeter of her estate. That should finish off the day. And provide her with the mental map she needed for her tunnels. In less than a year, Ponyville had dramatically changed. The population must have doubled, at least, to the colt and filly's surprised eyes. They spent the weekend just exploring the expanded town. The portal exclusion area now had an entire battalion of 600 guards assigned to it, a huge number considering the size of Ponyville. 3 additional platoons, 66 guards, had been directly posted to live at his mum's castle's new barracks. They were her personal guards, to her dismay. She had told them to assist the local law enforcement. The train depot had been expanded. There were now trains arriving and leaving almost every hour. Improvements included 3 separate sets of tracks. One was for cargo shipping, of which there appeared to be quite a bit. The second was for passengers embarking and disembarking, sometimes on 2 different trains at the same time. The third went to the portal entry building beside Sweet Apple Acres. Harry had heard 2 ponies in a train station talking about something called a roundhouse being built. The train station building itself had been enlarged. It now featured a spacious transfer room with 5 floors, 2 for outgoing and 3 for incoming travelers. There was a ticket booth, with lift gates to control access, between the 2 outgoing floors. The prices for the various destinations were clearly posted. The building also had an enlarged waiting room with comfortable seating, and an all-day and night luncheon counter. Harry doubted that floor travel to individuals' homes and businesses would be as widespread as it was in Wizarding England. Installing 6 million floors would be a massive undertaking. At 1,000 installations a day, it would still take 16+ years. Just training enough ponies in the installation and control procedures would take years. It was far easier to set up depots. Maybe in 50 years he would start to see most businesses and homes with floors. But not now. The cargo shipping yard was more of a huge warehouse with multiple tracks on each side. Products from England were unpacked from their inside enlarged, pony wagon-sized boxes and repacked into either inside enlarged saddlebags or into train cars for transport elsewhere. And the reverse was done for products from Equestria to England. The train cars themselves were not expanded to prevent problems with conflicting enchantments. New apartment buildings dotted the outside edges of Ponyville on new streets, as well as new restaurants and stores. There was even a new Quidditch stadium that took up one corner of the town. It was in almost constant use by Pegasi teams. Some were organized, some were ad hoc. Ponyville was no longer the sleepy little town it used to be. It was a bustling, growing boomtown, now that trade rules and commerce had entered into full swing. It was a week later that the Weasleys were due to arrive for their 3-week vacation in Equestria. Sirius, Harry, and the fillies waited impatiently just outside the portal dome. His mum was inside, by the portal tree, and with the attendant. Scootaloo sighed. "What's taking so long?" "They said they'd be here by 10, she groused. Sirius laughed and shrugged. The Weasleys are almost always arriving at the last minute. It's nice to see some things haven't changed in the last 10 years. But it's almost 10, now. Look. Apple Bloom said excitedly, bouncing up and down as she pointed into the dome, "There's Mrs. Weasley." It was true. Harry could see a Pegasus with dark red mane and tail exiting the portal, behind a blue-maned business unicorn with large saddlebags. The steady stream of ponies exiting the portal were a bit less than 2 ponies apart, a celestial. Outgoing ponies were already queuing up at the rotating door beside Harry and the fillies, waiting for their turn for the next hour. Each arriving pony stepped to the side to take off their robe and put it on a hook for an outgoing pony to use. "Oh, there's Percy, Fred, George, Ginny. Does anyone know who that is?" Harry said. A unicorn he didn't recognize, except for a Weasley red mane and tail, was behind Ginny. Had one of her brothers come through? The Weasleys were all grouping together to one side, waiting for their entire family. The blue-maned unicorn, now revealed as having a blue-green coat, and a printing press cutie mark, was already halfway around the tree. And there's Ron. Harry was astonished to see a grey unicorn with wheat blonde mane and tail collapse on top of Ron as he came through the portal. Ron said something they couldn't hear through the dome and the grey unicorn tried to scramble upright. The other Weasleys surged forward to help Ron. Immediately, nearly a dozen ponies jumped into action. The Weasleys were quickly surrounded. The ponies in the remote stations on the dome clearly unlocked their weapons and swung them to point directly at the Weasleys. There was much shouting going on, both inside and outside the dome. From what Harry could hear, someone had tried to sneak through the portal, somehow. A red light was blinking on the dome's entrance and the rotating door had stopped. It trapped 2 people and 3 ponies inside the 2 quarters that weren't open. The traveling ponies inside the dome all stopped where they were as they were surrounded by guards. Guards ran from the partition wall behind Harry and the fillies, and quickly took formation around the portal dome entrance/exit. Harry and his friends were being watched closely by 2 squads of 3 ponies. No more ponies came through the portal to follow Ron, so there must be a way of communicating back and forth. What's happening? What's happening? No pony answered them. Sirius was as puzzled as they were. Harry and the fillies bounced from hoof to hoof anxiously. After about half an hour, Harry and the fillies were escorted to a locked room in the partition wall with a large window that looked out into a corridor. Sirius was guided into a different room. They saw that the Weasleys were similarly being escorted, as was the grey unicorn. The single unicorn had almost a dozen guards flying and walking around him, at various distances that left him no chances of escaping. In fact, everyone still inside the dome, including the 2 people trapped by the door, were escorted to separate rooms in the partition wall. His mum showed up a few minutes after they had been placed in the room. "What's happening? What's happening?" they demanded, worried and crowding close to her. She smiled, and shifted nervously. "It seems Ron had a passenger. His pet rat Scabbers." She looked at them to make sure they were listening and understood. "Yes," Harry said as he nodded. She sighed. Turns out Scabbers was really a wizard in hiding. They all shrank back, their eyes wide at that statement. His mum nodded. "We're still checking the facts. And it'll be a couple of days before we're sure. But it seems that Peter Pettigrew has been hiding with the Weasleys, as a normal rat for the last 10 years and some months." They just stared at her in disbelief. They had all seen the rat, even played with him a little bit. The thought that it really had been a wizard in hiding was disgusting. Although it did explain the rat's rather extraordinarily clean habits. Scabbers has been rather anxious the last few days, after they started planning to come here. He's tried to escape a couple of times, so they've been keeping him in his cage. He was in his cage, hooked to Ron's rucksack, when they went through the portal. She sat down. "Unfortunately, the Weasleys are all caught up in this and are being interviewed to clear them of deliberate involvement. It's rather clear they knew nothing about this wizard hiding with them, but we want to make sure no one can accuse them of collaboration." She smiled. "On the other hoof, there is quite a large reward for the capture of Peter." "Oh. And Sirius is being questioned to verify that this wizard really is Peter Pettigrew." The princess stood back up. "In the meantime, I'm afraid we need to give you interviews, as well. Not that any pony thinks you've done anything wrong, mind you." She stopped and stared at Harry and the fillies, and then blinked. "Well, not anything regarding Peter, that is," she corrected herself, and smiled gently. "I've sent for Rarity, Applejack, Holiday, and Lofty. Because you're all still in school, an adult relative must be present during the interview." She turned to Harry. "So, since I am here already, let's start with Harry." She smiled reassuringly. "It's nothing bad, I promise, merely tedious." She turned and headed for the door. Harry followed her. Just as she was about to close the door behind them, she said to the fillies, "Do try to remember as much as you can about Scabbers, but don't discuss your stories with each other. If the stories you tell are too much alike, the interviewer will suspect you are trying to hide something when you aren't." As his mum had promised, the questioning was tedious in the extreme and took most of the afternoon, with a brief break for lunch. "When did you first see Scabbers? Did he do anything unusual for a rat? Did he ever do anything to indicate he might be more than a rat? Were you ever suspicious of him? Tell me about every time you saw him." "Yeah. Really tedious." They frequently repeated the questions in slightly different forms. Didn't they understand him the first time? It's not like what he said in answer would change all that much. Still, his mum was right beside him the entire time. After it was over, she took him to a new room, where he found the fillies and Ginny waiting. Also in the room were two unicorns he had never met, although both had the Weasley red mane and tail. One had a soft brown coat and the other pale yellow. Ginny was rather teary-eyed. The two stallions were consoling their sister. Princess Sparkle, Ginny said, straightening. This is my oldest brother, Bill Weasley, she pointed to the pale yellow stallion. He works at Gringotts as a cursebreaker. Harry noted he had an earring that was a thong and wasn't quite as scrawny as Harry had expected from someone just turned into a pony by the portal. The earring would gather him some notoriety quite quickly, here in Equestria, Harry knew. In fact, Harry was surprised the guards had released him so soon, despite the thong. She pointed with a wing to the brown-coated pony, who had a long shiny burn mark on one foreleg. And this is my second oldest brother, Charlie Weasley, who works at the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. Charlie's muscles stood out from a thin frame. Harry wondered how he would react upon seeing Spike. And this is Princess Twilight Sparkle, she said, bowing. Both Weasleys performed awkward bows, and stumbled a bit. Sorry, mumbled Charlie. Not used to having 4 legs. I am pleased to meet you both, Twilight said. And you needn't be formal with me. She scrunched up her face. I hate all that formality stuff. She smirked. As for 4 legs, I'm sure the twins will be happy to give you all the exercise you need to become comfortable. She glanced sideways at Harry. And Harry tells me the quickest way is to stop thinking about it. Ah, said Bill, nodding. And this? He crossed his eyes looking up at his new horn. What followed was a lesson in using your horn to do magic that admirably kept every pony occupied as the afternoon progressed. At regular intervals, the other members of the Weasley family showed up. By dinner time, everyone was finished. Sirius was the last, as he knew the most about what Peter had been like, and the things they should ask that no one but Peter would be able to answer. He would have to come back over the next few days to assist them in their questioning Peter. Peter was still being grilled about every facet of his life. The interrogation would continue tonight, by Princess Luna, while the wizard slept, Harry knew. By the time they were finished, they would have a complete picture of what the Death Eater organization had done in the past, and who the existing members might be and Peter's involvement. When brewed with the proper ingredients, the seeds of truth were invaluable in questioning anyone accused of a crime. It was magic itself, via the blooming flowers in the flower tray in the middle of the table, that judged if a person was truthful. Lying, except by omission, was flat out impossible. In addition, Twilight explained after they were all together, on the promise that we wouldn't return him to the wizarding world, he has promised to tell the truth. She snickered. Apparently, from overhearing conversations at the Burrow and at Hogwarts, he knows that if he showed his face anywhere, he would spend the rest of his life in Azkaban. Based on what Harry had heard of both the Canterlot dungeons and Azkaban, the former was much preferable to the later. From what his mom had told him, at least the Canterlot dungeons would give him a lifestyle not all that different from what he had been living at the Weasley Burrow. That is, lazing around, eating, and sleeping. They were all pretty tired by the time they returned to the castle, so it was a quiet, welcome to Equestria, dinner at the castle that evening, at first. Charlie and Bill had focused on Spike as he set the table and brought out their meal. Watching their eyes bulge out the first time he came out of the kitchen with a platter had been immensely amusing. Watching their jaws drop when he greeted Twilight was equally comical. Sirius kept glancing between them and chortling at their expressions. They had barely started dinner when Twilight apologized to the Weasleys for inconveniencing them at the portal. Mr. Weasley had immediately apologized for causing the problem in the first place. After several rounds of apologies, Rarity stood up and politely declared the matter settled. She then suggested, why not partake of the Ponyville Day Spa, tomorrow? You can join me, Fluttershy, Applejack, and Rainbow Dash at our regular appointment. You can relax and restore your peace of mind, and it would give you all a new appreciation of just how fine the pony form is. It'll be my treat to welcome you to Equestria. She glanced at Ginny and Molly. I'm sure you would enjoy having a professional show you how to preen your feathers. Oh yes, that's a marvelous idea," declared Myrtle. "Can I go, too?" She aimed her question at Twilight. The former ghost clearly remembered what her trip to the spa during Christmas break had been like. After the sparse facilities of Hogwarts, she was more than willing to be pampered. Twilight nodded, smiling. Harry watched as Mr. and Mrs. Weasley looked uncertainly at each other. "Go on," Myrtle urged. "You'll definitely find it worth it." Then regaled them with how wonderful an experience it was, something they should definitely do while here in Equestria. "I would go, too, if I weren't involved with a certain rat," Sirius said calmly, gritting his teeth when he said rat. "I can tell you it is quite relaxing." The two Weasleys looked at each other and made faces until Mr. Weasley turned and said, "All right. We'll give it a try." It took a bit more to convince the older three Weasley boys. The twins, it turned out, had an appointment the next morning with Filthy Rich. It was regarding their earnings, so far. Plus, they had some new ideas they wanted to share. No to mention some improvements on their gender gingers. Harry didn't bother fussing. He knew that as soon as the fillies had decided to go, that he was going to be brought along. Protesting wouldn't work. Not that he was really bothered, anyway. For some reason, Sirius smiled and chuckled whenever he looked at Harry and the fillies, when they were together. In the end, even Ron decided to join them, although for him it was the realization that his parents wouldn't let him stay alone at the palace if everyone else was going. Plus, he didn't trust his brothers enough to stay with them. The spa trip in the morning was off to a fairly early start. They were almost late for the appointment, as was usual for the Weasleys, according to Sirius. Harry decided, as he relaxed into the hot tub, that a quiet morning after yesterday's excitement was just perfect. He couldn't help but sigh as he overheard Applejack whisper to Twilight, "Just like a colt, fights against a bath until he's in it, then you can't get him out." They both giggled. At first, it had been embarrassing, though. Ron had asked what Harry and the fillies had been doing this past week. That had led to his mum telling them how, on Tuesday morning, the Cutie Mark Crusaders unfairly, in their opinion had been officially banned from the Ponyville shipping depot and warehouse, and its environs. "Hey!" Sweetie Belle had objected. "We apologized. Nothing was permanently destroyed or ruined, either. And we promised not to rearrange any switching and transport systems to make them more efficient." That had then led to Sweetie Belle and Apple Bloom explaining how their Monday had gone. Which was how 5 train cars ended up in Appaloosa, and 7 others in Manhattan. And that the cars had managed to make the trips without train engines or the correct cargo. The cargo part was, admittedly, a mistake. "Hey! I thought that SWCH read W for West. I didn't know I was reading it upside down and it was supposed to mean Manhattan," had objected Scootaloo. "And if that SWCH was West, then the other must have been East, right?" Plus, another train car had burst into flames partway to Philadelphia, also without a train engine. Or cargo. An alert Pegasus had seen it and put the fire out before any real damage had occurred. No one was sure exactly how that had happened, or how the car had made it that far without any pony noticing it. It escaped its corral all on its own because it wanted to be free, Apple Bloom had claimed in defense. "They couldn't prove we had anything to do with that car, but they decided to blame us, anyway." She pouted and glared at her sister. That grounding, at least, had been only for 2 days. Nothing had been damaged, at least nothing that couldn't be easily repaired with the new Reparo charm now being taught to every pony with a wand. Which was mostly the guard, at this point. The simple utility of that spell guarantees that wands are going to be in every pony's hoof, Twilight explained. "We already have a several decades backlog." Harry did feel that the numerous keep-out posters that featured their likenesses were a bit over the top. The train station ponies were posting one every pony length on the new chain-link fence being built around the warehouse depot. Harry had spent the days exploring the castle. He had discovered that it now had a secret passage from the entry hall to the tallest tower and a slide from the same location to the pool. Plus, he could practice magic without anyone complaining. It hadn't been much of a grounding, in his opinion. Thoroughly enjoyable, even if he couldn't be with the fillies. Their attempt at helping out at the train station Thursday afternoon, as porters, had been quickly stopped mere minutes after they had started. The station manager's brother worked as one of the managers at the warehouse depot. He had been watching for the colt and 4 fillies. He had allowed them to help for about an hour under his, and all 5 of the porters, direct and close supervision. For some reason, only new ponies to Ponyville allowed them to touch their luggage. One frail, long-time resident, Chelsea Porcelain, when she had seen them headed for her trunk that had to weigh as much as she did, from its size had left her walker, run to the luggage car, picked up the trunk, and ran home without looking back. Harry hoped she hadn't hurt herself. Plus, only one car had been derailed. Naturally, none of the 4 had gained a cutie mark to show for their efforts in any of that. One interesting thing they did learn that week was that there was now a long, split-rail fence guarding the edge of the ever-free forest. Oh, yes, his mum explained to the Weasleys as they soaked in their mud bath, there are so many new ponies in town that we're afraid some might wander into it, not having been told of its danger. She sighed, if you go there, you'll notice the fence is about 100 celestials away from the forest. We had to concede some space to make up for what we took away with the portal exclusion zone. The fence extends for quite a distance in both directions, making it obvious that we're giving up that land to the forest. We've already seen signs that the forest has started expanding to the fence. All the Weasleys present looked at her as if she were barmy. She shrugged. It's harmony. We took what was the forest's for the portal. For balance, to maintain harmony, we must trade what isn't, to it. She looked at their shocked expressions. We must provide an outlet, otherwise we might have some unpleasant creatures making excursions into Ponyville. Truly, said Bill, shifting to look intently at her curiously. She smiled sadly at him. The region was created 1,000 years ago in a great magical battle that laid waste to the area that makes up most of the Everfree. Incredible quantities of both good and bad magic were released, and settled into the very land. It took a while for us to notice, but when this area was created, other places calmed down and became friendlier to us. She glanced around the room. Experience over the last 1,000 years indicates it is more than just a forest, it is an expression of wild magic. It balances all the tamed magic we ponies created. If we were to completely eradicate it, hundreds of smaller versions would appear all over Equestria. She sipped her cup of complimentary tea. Harmony is the balance of good and bad, not the elimination of one or the other. The Weasleys all sat back in contemplation. It was nearly noon when they left the spa, so they decided a leisurely lunch at Sugarcube Corner was an excellent idea. The building was much larger, now, and featured an outdoor dining area. Pinkie Pie was no longer the only employee. They were worried they might not find an available table because the outside area was simply packed with customers. What was the inside like? Pinkie popped up beside Twilight, as they dithered in the street, making everyone except the Ponyville ponies jump in shock. Go right in, she said gleefully. I've got your table all prepared. Twilight gave the hyper pony a quick hug and a warm smile. Thanks, she said. Then the pink pony zipped back inside. A few minutes later, inside the cafe, the Weasleys were amazed to see Pinkie Pie standing beside a table roped off in one corner, with exactly the number of seats they needed. Mr. Weasley turned to Twilight. Did you send a message? She shook her head. Nope. It's just Pinkie Pie. Don't think about it. They had no sooner arranged themselves around the table, than Pinkie returned with a tray. She began setting out muffins, slices of cake, and cider juices while dancing around the table. How did she know what to bring us? And so quickly, too, Mrs. Weasley said, nibbling cautiously at a muffin. Her eyes grew wide. She leaned back and looked at the muffin. This is delicious, she declared. Pinkie's cooking usually is. Applejack said, with a blissful look as she ate her apple chunk muffin. Almost as good as Granny's. It was quiet for a few minutes as everyone tucked into their meal. Almost as fast as they finished one muffin, cake slice, or juice, Pinky slid another in its place before they even knew she wasn't still in the kitchen. Was it difficult for you to get time off from your jobs? Twilight looked at Charlie and Bill. The two exchanged sheepish looks, and shrugged. Truthfully, said Charlie, arching his eyebrows. When I asked my boss at the reserve for time off to visit with my family at Princess Twilight's castle in Equestria, he said, no, quite emphatically. I'm actually on payroll with orders to foster good relations with the equestrian government and to learn what I can about the dragons. I'm supposed to ask if I can see some of the dragons here, to assess how different they are from our dragons. And if you might know of any spells we don't, or techniques for handling them. Spike fell off his chair. Really? He said incredulously. Charlie smirked awkwardly. Yeah. For example, you look a lot like an immature Romanian longhorn, only purple instead of green. Most of our dragons reach maturity in 3 or 4 years, so it's difficult to believe you're almost 11 years old and still not grown. He shook his head. And I can say, so far, if you're typical, mentally, that comparing you with our dragons is like comparing a mermaid to a bullfrog. Spike looked confused for a moment. Harry put in, think sea pony, like in your comics. Oh, said Spike, nodding as he figured it out. And I'm still a baby. Wait until you meet a grown-up. He scowled. I wouldn't bother with the teenagers, he muttered. He glanced out the window into the distance, obviously thinking of Pee-wee. That is one of the things I plan to do later, ask you who I needed to talk with to secure permission, Charlie said as he looked at Twilight hopefully. She nodded. I'll have to check with Princess Celestia. I don't know who among the dragons would be approachable. Did you bring any tribute for them? Tribute? He tilted his head questioningly. Oh, yes, you can't just go up to a dragon without offering something to their horde. They'd dismiss you out of hoof, she said. Spike nodded. That's not a problem if you didn't, he said helpfully. There's plenty of gems around. I'll show you which ones are particularly tasty. Charlie gave him a look that suggested he wasn't sure if the little dragon was joking or not. Okay, Charlie said unsurely. We'll discuss this more, later, said Harry's mum, and looked at Bill. He ducked his head slightly and smirked. Yeah, the same thing happened with me. He straightened. When I asked my boss at the current worksite, he almost threw a port key at me to return home, with orders to tell that to the head goblin. He chuckled. The goblins want to establish trade with Equestria, and want to send a trade delegation. I'm a scout, to see just what might be of interest and to arrange an itinerary. He looked at Spike, then back at Twilight. They are especially interested in the enchantable gems. Twilight studied him carefully, then nodded. We will discuss that later, as well. They spent almost an hour at the bakery, before heading back. Just as Twilight reached the door to leave, Pinky appeared beside her. The surprise party for newcomers is tomorrow, she stage whispered. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 45. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.